Welcome to another episode of the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. Today we're exploring one of the most extraordinary stories in American sports history, really, a journey that began behind prison walls and ended in Major League Baseball stadiums. Ron LeFlore was 23 years old when he played his first organized baseball game. The field, it was a prison yard at the state prison of Southern Michigan, where he was serving 5 to 15 years for armed robbery. 3.5 years later, he was patrolling center field at Tiger Stadium for the Detroit Tigers. And here to tell this remarkable story is Adam Henig, author of Baseball's Outcast, the story of Ron LeFlore. It just came out. Adam, welcome to the Speaking of Writers
Thanks, Steve.
podcast. It's great to have you
Thank you for
here.
having me.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here. And by the way, Adam's previous books include Watergate's Forgotten Hero about Frank Wills and Alex Haley's Roots, an author's Odyssey. His work has appeared in Time and the Tampa Bay Times and numerous other publications too. So, Adam, what first drew you to Ron LeFlore's story, and when did you realize it really deserved a full biography here?
What drew me to it is when I was a young boy, I wasn't much of a reader, which is kind of surprising considering I'm an author now, and I love to read. But the one thing I did read were books about baseball players, and I had pretty much gone through all of the children's biographies at the library, except for one. And my mom had, who was a school teacher, had pulled it out and said, I think you would like this. And it was called From Prison to the Major Leagues. And Ron LeFlore was a little before my time, but the story of how he went from prison to the major leagues was incredible, and it had always stuck with me. And so after I had finished the Frank Wills biography, I was looking for a new topic, and I was curious what had happened to Ron LeFlore. And he had a memoir, and which later was the basis for a made-for-TV movie starring LeVar Burton, who had just finished Roots. And the story stops at about 1976, in like his third season in the league, and he makes it to the All-Star game that year. But there's so much more to the story, and also too, it leaves a lot of things out, in terms of the context of the environment that he grew up in, really what Detroit was like in the post-World War II era, what it was like to be Black in Detroit, to live in poverty. And then, of course, too, just all of the inner workings of baseball and how Ron had trouble navigating through it because he didn't have that traditional upbringing of doing little league, of playing high school baseball, college baseball, getting drafted. None of that applied to Ron.
What draws you to these stories of people who slipped through the cracks of history, like Frank Wills?
Yeah, I think because part of me, when I come across a biography that I want to read, I don't want to read about someone who I already kind of know everything there is to know about them. I want to learn about someone who is that people don't realize how important they were at that period in their life. And Frank Wills is such a great example of that, and Ron LeFleur too. These are two guys who, at the height of their fame, were very well known, and then within just a few years, they are forgotten. And when we look back years later, you realize, wow, what an amazing impact that they had in their own way. I mean, with Ron, in terms of just his story of not only becoming a Major League Baseball player, but becoming a really good one. And with Frank Wills, who's the security guard who detected the burglars at the Watergate office building and notified the police, which of course eventually led to the resignation, the only time in U.S. history of a president, which was Nixon. Um, their story deserves to be told. And I find it really interesting. I find in terms of how they got to where they were, and I think because their stories have been forgotten, I do feel this incredible fortune to be able to share it with others.
Ron's first organized baseball game happened in a prison yard. Can you describe what that scene looked like?
Yeah, so we're going back to 1971. Ron had been in prison for already a year, and he had, in his own way, had gone through his own transformation. He had spent a significant amount of time in solitary confinement. He had endured horrors and tragedies that he was beginning to realize um, that his life was going to come to an end sooner than later if he wasn't going to make a change. And it was in solitary confinement, in a very small cell, where he didn't even have enough space to exercise properly. Um, and he was in there for all day, every day, for months. That he was going to make a change. And one of the changes that he decided was that his behavior was going to improve. And the way to do that in prison at that time was to advance yourself. So he decided to get his GED because he had dropped out of high school. He decided to take up a job within the prison facility. And then he also noticed that athletes would get special privileges. So he wanted to, and he was a natural athlete, very talented, always had been, just didn't have the discipline to stick with any particular sport. Um, but when he joined the baseball team, he was just doing it again as an added benefit in hopes that he would get an early release. He had no idea, as he shared with me, that it would lead to anything, let alone becoming a professional baseball player. But the manager of that team noticed that Ron had an innate athletic talent, something that very few people in general have, and that it just came so easy to him, even though he had never played organized baseball before. And this manager happened to have a connection on the outside who was close friends with at the time, the Detroit Tiger manager, Billy Martin. And that, of course, is how the story begins of Ron's venture in becoming a professional baseball player.
He was a great football player too, right?
He was actually built to be a running back.
Mm.
He was husky, he was strong, he was fast, and he had no fear. But he played a little football in high school for a Catholic school, and he got injured, and he didn't like the coach, and his injury hadn't healed well, and he just realized, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore, and that was the end of that.
The criminal justice system, Adam, of that era plays a significant role in your book. What did your research reveal about how that system shaped Ron's path, both into prison and eventually out of it?
Well, Ron, if when you read the book, you realize that Ron gets a lot of breaks his along the way in becoming a professional baseball player. And one of those breaks that he was fortunate to have is he happened to be in the in a prison where there was this very forward-thinking warden, a warden who believed that if we want to rehabilitate inmates, we need to actually put our money where our mouth is. And so he created all of these programs to incentivize good behavior. Those programs included recreational sports leagues. They included higher education, getting a college degree. They included having a furlough program so you could get an early release for just a few days, just so you can get kind of an idea of what it's going to be like on the outside when you do get released. He wanted to set up people for success. And at the time, that was not the common culture among wardens throughout the country. And so Ron had the good benefit of being in prison when this warden was enacting these policies. Now, with that said, prison was no picnic. As he described it to me, it was a nightmare. He saw people get murdered. He himself was attacked. He had never cried before like he did when he entered the penal system. Um, he was truly scared for his life and for his sanity. He described it as it's just insane. Um, and I think to this day, he is still traumatized from it. I happened to actually speak with an inmate who did serve time with Ron, and he had a very similar experience. and eventually you get hardened to it, and hopefully you can get released and contribute back to society. But prison is no joke. And I think that Ron was very lucky. He really was. He was a talented athlete. He got lucky in the sense that he had this manager who had this connection with the Detroit Tigers, and as I spoke about the warden, um, not most inmates are not that lucky. If you don't have a support system and you don't have something that you can immediately showcase, it's going to be very difficult to make that transition.
You interviewed Ron LeFlore extensively for this book. What surprised you most about him in those conversations?
Um, Ron is very personable and very upfront. And when I would ask him questions that were quite personal, he was very willing to share. And I'll give you an example. In his memoir, he leaves out a number of stories, one in particular that I came across. And I wanted to confirm that it had actually happened, and he did. And then he alluded to some additional information, but it had to do when he was a young boy. He had actually skipped school, and he came home early to find that his mom was sleeping with the landlord in order to pay the rent because her husband had been let go and was unable to find work. And that traumatized Ron. He just did not know that this was happening, and he did not know the extent of how poor they really were. And Ron was very upfront about it. I asked him, well, why didn't you include it in your book? And naturally, he was too embarrassed. But those conversations were very helpful. When I first spoke to him, I told him quite frankly, like, I'm going to write this book with or without your cooperation. It's not a memoir. It's not a collaboration. It's not going to be what's called a hagiography. This is going to be true. It's going to be pleasant and not so pleasant. And my goal is to tell your story accurately and fairly. And I was hoping that he would um, contribute to, the research that I was doing, and he did. And we had many conversations that took place over the course of about 5 years. And we finally got to meet in person this past November, and it was a real treat. At least for me, it was.
In Detroit?
No, it was actually in Los Angeles. He was
Mm.
being honored, and I flew down and I met him, and it was like meeting a long lost relative
Mm.
that you'd never met before, and it was really special. It was nice.
Did he read the book?
Um, I don't know if he read it cover to cover, but I did send him a copy, and he took issue on a few things. And the one thing I forewarned Ron about is that you may not like that everything is in here, but you're not going to be surprised by anything. This has all been um, had either been mentioned before in some sort of publication, or it's just something that you're probably aware of, but it hadn't been published before. I mean, just to give you an example, I happened to come across the Bat Boy for the Detroit Tigers when Ron was playing. So this is the mid 70s. And I asked him, well, what did you think of Ron? He wasn't a big fan. Ron had a giant ego and he was very self-serving. And again, that's not something that, when a book is written about you, you want to hear about. But that was someone's experience. And Ron couldn't take issue with that because I think deep down he knew it was true.
Yeah. Ron LeFore's 1978 autobiography, which you're just talking about, became a bestseller and was adapted into a TV movie starring LeVar Burton. What was it like for Ron to see his life story become entertainment? And how did that, talking about ego, how did that fame affect him?
Well, you took someone who had already had, I think, quite a big ego, and it just got inflated. Ron enjoyed the trappings of fame. He enjoyed rubbing elbows with the most popular celebrities of the time. Ron was telling me once that, he can go to any concert and go backstage and hang out with the headliner, and it was whether it was Bob Marley or Rod Stewart. I mean, he was truly an A-list celebrity for a short period of time. When the team flew to New York to play the Yankees, he wouldn't go on the bus back to the hotel. He would get picked up by Reggie Jackson in his Rolls Royce, and they would head off to Studio 54. So Ron really was at the top in terms of his popularity. In Detroit, he could do no wrong. I mean, he literally that was just he could drive 100 miles an hour down the street, and no one would think anything of it. Unfortunately, not everyone was going to tolerate it. And so his last year on the Tigers, he had this manager named Sparky Anderson,
Mm.
who had quite the reputation for being very militant and also not liking to be undermined. And he himself had a very big ego, and it was pretty clear that either Sparky was going to go or Ron was going to go by the end of the season. And Sparky stayed with the Tigers for a number of years, so it was Ron who was let go. And fans in Detroit were very upset about it, to the point where someone went out of their way to pick up all of this horse manure in the back of their truck and then leave it on the front steps of Tiger Stadium, right in front of the management office. That's how well they thought of it. So Ron went to Montreal, and Montreal in the early 1980s was a real popular, I mean, it still is, but it was a very popular nightclub scene, and it was open all hours of the night. And Ron took full advantage of that. He unfortunately got mixed up into drugs, and he developed a serious cocaine addiction that eventually affected his performance and also made him very unpopular to the front office. And he only survived one season there. The Expos didn't want to re-sign him, and so then he goes to the White Sox, where at this point cocaine has pretty much consumed him. He is overweight. He's no longer as fast as he used to be. The White Sox are paying him what would be the equivalent today of $3 million, and he's sitting on the bench. And so they were fed up with him. And shortly thereafter, he's out of baseball, and within a few years, he's broke. And so he has to resort to becoming a security guard, to being an umpire for high school baseball games, to working as a sky cap at an airport. I mean, this is a guy who was making at that time $750,000 a year, and just a few years later, he's making minimum wage. So I think that humbled him. He wanted to get back into baseball, and no one wanted to deal with him. And hence the title of the book, Baseball's Outcasts. Ron just he never could find his footing in baseball. As popular as he was, as good as he was, he just couldn't navigate how the system works, and what you need to do in order to kind of retain your position within it.
There's a pattern in sports biography of the rise and fall narrative, Adam. You explicitly say this book is, quote, not just another book about the rise and fall of a troubled athlete. What makes Ron's story so different?
Well, as we said at the beginning, it's the fact that he never played baseball before,
Mm.
and then he ends up becoming a professional baseball player. It's the fact that he was in and out of the criminal justice system from the time he was probably about 11 or 12 years old. I mean, he was going to what the equivalent would be today is known as juvenile hall. He had, he was going to these kind of low-level prisons for wayward youth, and then eventually he graduated to the state prison of Southern Michigan. So there, as I noted, is that there are a few examples of people who have become professional athletes, but coming from the penal system. The most notable is Sonny Liston, the boxer.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and otherwise, most of the other individuals I cited, because I really tried to figure out how many people actually made it to a professional sports league from prison. And there aren't that many. And there were a few who were notable, but other than Sonny Liston, Ron LeFlore, I mean, for Ron LeFleur to become a professional baseball player, the odds were just so not in his favor. They're not in the favor of anyone. I mean,
Yeah.
he had no professional experience. He makes it to the major leagues within 13 months of being released from prison. So while he's on the Detroit Tigers in his first season, he's still on probation. So, I mean, he could be sent back to prison for driving 2 miles over the speed limit. Um, so it's just incredible that this no matter how talented Ron was, it's incredible that he was able to make it through the minor leagues, which in and of itself is not easy and is quite difficult. And within just a little more than a year, become the starting center fielder on the Detroit Tigers. And then to top it off, not only does he make it to the Major League Baseball, but he actually is one of the best players in the league. Within 2 seasons, he's an all-star. By the end of the 1970s, he's one of the best offensive players in the American League. So it is astonishing what he was able to achieve. And unfortunately, because he didn't have the guardrails, he didn't have the support system, uh, it all disappeared. It all disintegrated, and he has a lot of regrets to this day. He knows he messed up. He knows he was on the trajectory of a Hall of Fame career. That's how good he was.
And Adam, what do you hope readers take away from Ron LeFleur's story?
Well, I think one of the things that I took away is is the impact of your social environment, particularly when you're growing up. And I talk a lot about what Detroit looked like through the lens of an 8 year old who's living in a family where there's an alcoholic father, where there are prostitutes and drug dealers and pool halls, uh, literally on the street corner from where you live. What it's like to grow up where school is not the priority, and um, and then being able to figure and to basically fight or flight. Ron had to survive, and his way of surviving was to be tough, and to steal and to do what he needed to do to make it through each day. He wasn't, there was no parental guidance. And again, it is an amazing story to show that even despite all of these setbacks, Ron was still, and this is why I'm always so impressed with Ron when I speak with him, is how he was able to turn his life around. It is very difficult task. And I don't think that even if someone had his talent, and in his situation, I don't think most people would have been able to do it. Ron was just determined. And um, every so often when I speak to him, I get that when I it comes across in his conversations. And when he was being honored this past November in Los Angeles, he gave a really powerful speech, and it comes across that what Ron was determined to become a professional baseball player. He was determined to get out of prison, and he did it. And it's just astonishing, and it was worthy of a biography.
He's Adam Henig. The book is Baseball's Outcast, the story of Ron LeFlore. It's available now wherever you get your books, and shop local too at your independent bookstore. And if they don't have it, ask for it. AdamHenig.com is the website. What is next for you and your writing? Working on another one yet?
I always am. It's a labor of love, and I'm still trying to figure it out. So visit my website for updates, and hopefully I'll be able to share it soon.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Steve.
And don't forget to subscribe to the Speaking of Writers podcast on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Steve Richards. Thank you for watching and for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time.